All right, hello everyone, and welcome to Excel Analytics, Advanced Excel Charts and Graphs. I'm so excited to have you here, and I'm so excited to share this content with all of you. So before we dive in, why don't we just take a minute and talk through the course outline and structure. In terms of course structure, what's nice is that I've included downloadable cheat sheets for 20 plus chart types in Excel. These show you when and why to use each type of visualization, including your basics like bars, columns, lines, and pies, and more advanced creative options like surface and contour charts, waterfalls, tree maps, sunbursts, even geospatial heat maps. Now, the bulk of the content in this course takes place through screencasts and practice files. This is where I'll actually guide you through hands-on demos every step of the way so that you can learn at your own pace. I'll start by covering your basic, out-of-the-box chart templates, and we'll work towards more advanced, custom-built, interactive data visualizations. Now, the course outline starts with some data visualization best practices. I'll cover some key principles and talk about what I like to call the 10-second rule, and then walk through some good, bad, and ugly examples of data viz. Second, we'll go into chart customization in Excel. This is just a quick primer to make sure that you're comfortable working with chart elements and formatting options and working with custom templates. Third, we get into the real meat of the course. This is all about mastering the basic charts and graphs. We'll review and demo each of those 20 plus chart types in Excel. And then last but not least, we've got our next level exercises. This is really what sets this course apart from the rest. I'll walk through over a dozen custom-built advanced demos to really turn you into a data visualization expert. And I guarantee these are demos that you've never seen before and that you'd be shocked that Excel is capable of. Ready to get started? Let's do this. Okay, next up, just want to take 1 minute to talk about changing chart types and adding things like a secondary axis. So right now I'm plotting total spend and clicks as a clustered column. Both of these are volume metrics. They're both on a similar scale, so it makes sense to compare them on the same axis. But let's say that instead of spend and clicks, I want to visualize spend and cost per click, which is a rate metric that's on a completely different scale. What I can do is right-click my plot area, choose Select Data, delete or remove that click option, and add a new series. So the name of this series is cost per click in cell F1, and the values are the values in F2 through F13. Hit OK, and then the horizontal axis labels, I can edit those as well, just to make sure that all of my series are reading from the same horizontal axis, and then hit OK. As you can see, it's brought the field in, but we can't see it because it's so small compared to total spend, and because we have this axis minimum set that's well above the values for cost per click. So my option here is to go into Chart Tools, change chart type, and again, this is where you can just change the format or change the chart type to any of the stock options. In this case, I want to go all the way to the bottom to Combo, and here's where it introduces the secondary axis option. So Excel is saying, okay, you've got two series, you've got spend and cost per click. It's already recommending that I make my cost per click field a line, and because it's on such a different scale, all I need to do is check that box, and now in the preview pane, it shows that, okay, I've got cost per click mapped out on my secondary axis, and spend still mapped out on my first axis. And one kind of side note about using combo charts is that if I try to keep this as a clustered column, you'll see that the series are completely overlapped. And that's because now each series kind of lives in its own axis, and so you lose that side-by-side effect that you get with a traditional clustered column with both fields on the same axis. So in this case, a line is actually just a much more effective way to visualize this trend. So I can hit OK, and there you go. So I can do the same formatting options on this axis. I'll make it bold and a bit smaller. And that's the first way to add that secondary axis. The second approach is to start in the chart, right-click, format the data series itself, and you get your same two options there as well. So secondary, allows me to visualize that series because it's on a completely different scale. So there you go, changing chart types and adding a secondary axis. Let's talk about the key principles of data visualization, because at the end of the day, it doesn't matter how technically proficient you are at creating charts. All that is meaningless if you don't understand how to effectively tell a story. So number one, strive for clarity and simplicity above all else. Data viz is about maximizing impact and minimizing noise. Don't be one of those people who adds all these bells and whistles to their charts, tries to plot 4, 5, 6 data series on the same axis just because it's an option. Listen, at the end of the day, if it doesn't add value or serve a purpose, just get rid of it. Second, always focus on creating a narrative. Data viz isn't just showing data, it's telling a story. So make sure you're communicating your key insights clearly, quickly, and powerfully. Finally, strike a balance between design and function. When it comes to design, selecting the right type of chart is critical. And always remember that beautiful is good, functional is better, and both is ideal. So I have a rule of thumb that I call the 10-second rule, which basically means that if a viewer can't interpret the story within 10 seconds, it's time to simplify. So what I'm about to do is show you a chart on the screen with a 10-second timer. At the end of those 10 seconds, I want you to pause the video and see if you can explain exactly what story that chart was intended to tell. Ready? Go. Time's up. So how do you do? You may have noticed that we're plotting average temperatures here by city, by month, and that certain cities follow one pattern while others follow another. But realistically, 10 seconds is not a lot of time to understand and digest that information. So now what I'm going to do is show you a different visualization built from the exact same data set and restart the timer. Ready? Let's try again. Alright, how'd you do that time? As you can see here, by applying some data viz techniques like custom formatting and using intuitive color scales, and by actually eliminating the raw data points, we can draw attention to the story at hand, which is the relative trend and pattern that we see at the city level. So as you continue through the rest of this course, always remember the 3 principles. Focus on clarity and simplicity, create a narrative, and strike a balance between design and function. Alright, it's time for one of my favorite sections of the course called the good, the bad, and the ugly. Now in this section, I'm going to walk through some examples that I feel are strong, weak, and downright ugly cases of data visualization. So first, let's start with the good. Here we have a nice overlapping area chart. It shows political polarization in the US. It also has an option to change the date range to show animations over time. Really nice, really simple, really effective. Next, we have a custom-built pacing chart where we're looking at cumulative revenue over time against a goal or a target. And here we're using some really clever dynamic formatting rules to shade the different colors based on whether we're underpacing or overpacing that target. And third, simple, intuitive, custom-designed gauge chart. This chart is really only intended to show one thing, which is where a particular value falls along a given range, in this case from 0 to 100%, but it's a nice example of how to combine individual chart types in Excel to create something brand new and totally unique. So the good news is that I'm going to show you how to build all 3 of these types of charts at the end of this course, along with many, many more, so stay tuned for that. Which brings us to the bad. First case here, we have a really busy, really cluttered radial chart. This is one of those cases where it seems to be really heavy on design and really light on function, meaning I might print it out because it looks nice, but I really don't know what sort of insight I'm supposed to derive from this. Second, we've got a line chart with just way too many data series. There's no legend, there's no clear narrative. I don't even know where to start with this one. And then third, good example of a misleading chart type. We're looking at monthly sales from September through January here. Technically, this is valid because the percentages do add up to 100%. The problem is when you're trying to show relative volume or trending over time, there are other charts that communicate that much more effectively, like column charts or line charts. Last but not least, we've got the ugly. Here's one of those cases where, it's just way too many elements. There's a distracting 3D design. Another clear-cut case of all design, no function. Next up, we have what seems to be a really simple chart, which is total revenue April versus May. Now, if I asked you, tell me what happened month over month, you might be tempted to say, well, Chris, it's pretty clear that revenue plummeted in May. Now, my response would be, take a look at the y-axis, because the minimum is 175K, and the maximum is only 189, which means we're looking at a pretty thin slice of the data here. And in fact, when you zoom out, that story completely changes in the context of the bigger picture. So that's why it can be really dangerous to incorporate misleading axis scales. Last but not least, or perhaps last and least, we have this infographic style visual, which uses improper use of percentages. They don't add up to 100%. On top of that, we've got inconsistent scaling. So somehow the 78% slice is actually thinner than the 61% slice. And in this case, the visualization actually does nothing but detract from the data itself. So there you go, some examples of good, bad, and ugly data viz. The last topic that I want to cover before we dive into Excel is something that I call the 3 key questions. And these are the questions that you need to ask yourself before you start building or designing or playing with data visualizations to make sure that you're actually on the right track. So first, what type of data are you working with? This has a huge impact in determining which type of visualization you actually use. So whether you have integers, real numbers, categorical data, time series data, geospatial, etc. So for instance, categorical data tends to work really well with things like clustered bars or clustered columns, for instance. Time series data works great with line charts, and obviously geospatial data lends itself very well to maps. Similar kind of question, what are you trying to actually communicate? So what's the point you're getting across? Is it the relationship between variables? Is it a comparison? Are you looking at the composition or how composition has changed over time? Distribution, how things are trending? All of these stories need to be communicated in very different ways. So for instance, scatter plots are a great way to show relationships. Pie charts or 100% stacked columns are a great way to show compositions, and so on and so forth. And then last but not least, who is the end user consuming this information? The type of visualization that you build for a fellow analyst, for instance, is going to look very different from the visualization that you build for a CEO. So keep in mind who's actually the end user before you even start building. So with that wraps up our introduction. Next up, we're going to be talking about actually customizing chart elements, formats, and templates in Excel. So stay tuned. Before we shift gears into Excel, I just want to take 1 minute to set some expectations. First, I'll be using Excel 2016 for all of the upcoming demos and exercises. What that means is that what you see on my screen might not always match what you see on your own, and some chart types, specifically tree maps, sunbursts, waterfalls, etc., won't be available in earlier versions of Excel. Second, this course is designed with PC users in mind. That said, if you're a Mac user, by all means feel free to join, feel free to apply the same key concepts, but just keep in mind that the user experience is significantly different across platforms. Last but not least, if you're already an advanced user, feel free to bounce around. This course really is a non-linear course, meaning that you can explore the chart types, demos, or content that's most relevant or interesting to you. And last but not least, as always, feel free to post on the discussion board or shoot me a message directly if you have any questions along the way. Okay, so we're going to get started with talking about inserting charts into Excel and customizing some of the chart elements and layouts and colors and styles. So if you download the Data Visualization Exercises Excel workbook, you'll see a number of tabs here. For this section, we're going to be focusing on this first tab, Customizing Charts, but you'll see moving left to right, there are a number of chart-specific tabs with data sets already pre-populated. that's where we're going to be building out each of these different chart types: tree maps, sunbursts, waterfalls, radars, surface charts, and so on and so forth. As you continue to move to the right, you'll see these green tabs. This is where we're going to do our next level data viz exercises. So let's go all the way back to the left and focus on the Customizing Charts tab. So I've got a basic sample data set here. I've got data by month with mobile spend, desktop spend, total, clicks, transactions, etc. One tip that I like to use is whenever I'm doing anything with charts, graphs, dashboards, or data viz in general in Excel, I like to get rid of the grid lines, and that really makes it feel more like a canvas to me as opposed to a spreadsheet. So you can go into the View menu and just uncheck that grid lines box. Easy peasy, now I've got a nice clean white canvas to work with. Now in terms of actually inserting the charts into Excel, I assume most of you already know this, but we're going to work on our Insert menu, and this is kind of home base here, this chart section. So there are two options for inserting charts. The first, with any cell selected in the data range, I could just go in and say, drop in a clustered column. And when I do that, Excel searches the data on the sheet, and it says, okay, this looks like an x-axis, these look like column headers, this looks like the raw data that this user is looking to plot. So in this case, I don't want all of these metrics to be plotted, especially something like transaction rate alongside clicks and spend, which are just on completely different scales. So I'm going to delete that and take a different approach, which is to actually select the data that I want to highlight, and I can use the Control key. What I'll do is select columns A, D, and E through row 13, and then jump back into that Insert menu. Again, choose Clustered Column, and this time, as you can see, it's only plotting total spend and clicks, which makes a lot more sense. So once you have a chart inserted, you'll see this kind of top-level tab appear called Chart Tools, and within Chart Tools, you've got Design and Format. Think of the design options as architecture of your chart. So how is it built? What features do you want to show? Do you want data labels, axis titles, chart titles, legends, trend lines, etc.? Whereas format is more about look and feel. So do you want fill options or outline options or shape effects built in there? So for this lecture, let's focus on the design options, and we'll start all the way on the left with this add chart element option. So this is really the most important option on this tab because it allows you to insert or delete or modify any particular element of the chart. Now I'm going to go through this kind of quickly because I'll be using just about all of these chart elements in context later on in this course. So for now, I'll just give you the quick primer. Your axis options let you add or remove primary horizontal or vertical axes. You can add titles, which really is a best practice. You want to show the user exactly what they're looking at. You can add a chart title above or overlaid. You can add data labels with different orientations. Data table just puts the actual raw data beneath the chart. Error bars aren't particularly useful in this case, but when you have data with interesting standard deviations, you can use error bars to visualize those. Grid lines, you can customize vertical and horizontal as you see fit. Legend, another kind of best practice here. Again, show the user what they're looking at, don't make them guess. And then finally, you've got trend lines here that you can set for any particular series you choose. And there you go. So those are the chart elements. Quick layouts are basically just prepackaged collections of elements. So these are ones that Excel has already built out that it thinks might be helpful for you. If we're being totally honest, I don't typically use these just because I have all the raw pieces. I'd rather customize the view myself, but it's fair game to kind of poke through here and see if there's one that serves your needs. Similar with change colors, these are just pre-packaged palettes that you can scroll through to change the look of your chart. And then chart styles here, similar idea to the layouts. These are just pre-packaged styles which include chart elements and colors and fill effects and all that good stuff. So these are kind of your final products almost. Again, I don't tend to use these because I like to customize things myself, but they're there in case you want them. And then you have a few other options here. You can switch the row and column. So you can either look at spend and clicks by month, or month by spend and clicks, which doesn't really make a whole lot of sense in this case. Select data allows you to modify your data series or your axis labels. What I could do here is edit this total spend series and just change the name to spend, for instance. Again, I'll show you many more examples of this as we move on. And then the change chart type option I'll also be talking about in a bit. This is where you can kind of adjust and say, all right, instead of clustered columns, let's do an area, or let's do a pie chart. So there you have it. Those are the basic chart elements, layouts, colors, and styles.